I'm not big on microphones, so I'm hoping that you can hear me. Can you hear me? No? Okay, so I guess I have to use a microphone. I'm really, really happy to be with you guys today because I feel like this topic in particular was actually the topic that started my journey with God. Like, you know when people always say you have to believe in God because of just faith, and you feel like sometimes, like in this day and age, faith like will take you to a certain point, but you need some logic behind why you believe in what you believe. You ever get that feeling before? You ever get the feeling that sometimes people think that you're dumb because you're a Christian? Or people think that you're not intelligent because you're a Christian? Or people think that you're not a scientist because you're a Christian? And in this day and age, you find that lots of universities and lots of professors are basically saying that if you believe in God, then you are not intelligent. Well, I'm here today not to make a defense for God, because God doesn't need defense. We're not in the position of making a defense for God. God can defend himself. But what we are in the position of to do is to make sure that we strengthen our faith and we make sure we know what we believe in, because when the opportunity arises and somebody says to me, hey, you're a fool because you're a Christian, you have the ability, as Abuna was saying before, to give a reason for the hope that lies within you. Because the Bible tells us that we have to be prepared when asked. We can't just say, oh, go ask Abuna, or go ask one of the servants, or go ask. That makes us weak. It makes us weak. When we're unable to give an answer for what we believe in, we've actually limited our capabilities. We've limited the mind that God has given us as his children. So what I'm hoping to do today is to just go through some of the... I know Dr. George a few months ago gave a spiritual day with you guys on evolution, on science. Today I'm going to take this more from a philosophical and historical approach. It would have been nice to talk about it from a scientific approach, but since you guys covered that, I'm going to just give you from a philosophical perspective of why we believe in what we believe. So, St. Gregory the theologian said something really cool. He said, it's impossible to express God. And even more, it's impossible to conceive him. So it's hard, he says it's impossible to talk about God and to give the right adjectives to describe God. But it's even more impossible to conceive him. Let that stick with you for a few seconds. The question of God, guys, has been the question of the ages. See this little baby right here? From the moment he was born, he was thinking, who is God? What is God about? I need to learn more about him. The question of God is the biggest question because it has huge repercussions on how we live our life. If God exists, then the trajectory of the way our lives, like the way we experience life, has to change. If God doesn't exist, then the way we live our lives has to change. So the question of God is the biggest question for so many people because we live in an extremely atheistic world. People want to be able to do what they want to do and have nobody to hold them accountable. A lot of us feel that way oftentimes, right? Like, I want to do what I want to do, and I don't want to have anyone bind me to any rules or any regulations. Like, I want to just live, right? You guys have said that before. Like, come on, servants, you guys are annoying. Leave me alone. Let me just live. Let me experience life. Let me do what I got to do. Everybody in the world is doing things. Why can't I do things? So if God exists, then the way we live has to change. If God doesn't exist, then the way we live has to change. Everything that we're doing is pointless. Follow me so far? So, can we prove the existence of God? And by the way, you guys have handouts in front of you. So, a lot of the handouts, you guys have, who has the handout right there? Right there. I just want to know where the fill in the blanks are. So, on the handouts, you guys have, they're meant for this to be kind of like, the way that they say we learn is by seeing, by hearing, and by writing. So the way that I want this to really stick is for you guys to be able to see on the PowerPoint, but to also be able to hear and to be able to write. So, the existence of God can be proven using logical principles, not empirical methods. Okay? What does that mean? Big words, like, what does that even mean? In other words, basically, we cannot set up a scientific experiment with the circle of science, scientific method, which is basically, you have an observation, you have an induction, a deduction, you evaluate, you test, all these, the circular method of how you explore something. We can't prove the existence of God using empirical methods or the scientific method. But we can prove the existence of God using logic. Does that make sense? Because science is limited. Science is limited in the fact that, think about this for a second. Can I prove that love exists by science? Like if I were to tell you, I want you to do a scientific method on proving the existence of love, how would you do that? You can't prove love. If I asked you, I want you to do a scientific method to prove hope, or to prove peace, or to prove this, or to prove that. I want you to do a scientific method to prove God. In every branch of life, you have like a tool, right? So in medicine, like for example, a surgeon, he'll use a scalpel, right? When he's going to operate, he's going to open up a wound or something like that, he'll use a scalpel. In astronomy, they use a telescope. In biology, they use a microscope. In chemistry, they use test tubes, right? But God can't be placed in a test tube. You can't dissect God. But you use what? You use human principles and human experience to know that God exists. So you have to use the mind. You have to use experience. You have to use life to know that God exists. Does that make sense so far? So let's get to some of the arguments. So the first argument is the argument of first cause. Okay? What is the argument of first cause? Let's take this very slowly and very simply. You see this train in this picture right here? How is this train moving? You see how each car in the train is separated. How does the first car move compared to the second car, compared to the third car, compared to the fourth car? How does the train move? Obviously the train has a motor, right? But let's take this, imagine the train didn't have a motor. And somebody had to push the train. The train wouldn't move unless there was some force behind it, or somebody pushing it, or somebody behind it to get the train to start moving. In the same way, if I were to take a ball, and I were to just plop it onto the floor, that ball wouldn't move unless there was some sort of force or velocity to push the ball. Does that make sense? So we can't say that something starts to move unless there was a first mover. Does that make sense? A ball, if I put it on the ground, it's not going to move unless somebody rolls it. A train isn't going to move without an engine unless there's some force or velocity to move it. Does that make sense? So, what is the first cause of the existence of the universe? Every cause, or every effect has a cause. If I were to take my cell phone here, right? And I were to drop it onto the floor. What caused this phone to drop to the floor? Gravity, right? First, me letting go of it. Second, gravity pushing it down to the floor. And third, just the weight of the cell phone. So, the question is this. If there is a chain of events happening, if there's a train moving, if there's a ball moving, who got it going? Who started? How did it begin? Magic? Who started it? world, as intricately complex as it is, start with nobody starting it? Without a designer. The law of cause and effect says this, is from nothing, nothing comes. Every effect has a cause. Every effect has a cause. And this is the first principle that we have to get. And this is the one that actually philosophers have the most difficult time disproving. Because some philosophers will say that how are we to know that the first cause didn't just happen by, why are we to switch and put our faith into a designer being the first cause or somebody being the first cause versus it just happening? What takes more faith? To believe that by accident this world came into existence, or to believe that there was a designer? In my opinion, it takes more faith to believe that this just miraculously happened. You ever seen a snowflake? There's not one single snowflake that's the same as the second snowflake. You ever seen the way we categorize animals? You ever seen a fingerprint? You ever seen DNA? You ever seen genetics? There's the way that we are intricately made, and the way that this world is so intricately complex proves that there has to be somebody behind this. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? The argument of first cause is the major argument that we have to have solid. Because when some of my friends that are atheists come up to me and they say, how do you believe in God? I say, I believe in God in the same way that I believe something has to be behind everything that we do. Let's take that a little further. Mathematics proves God. If there was no positive integer, no one unit, there could be no subsequent additional units. What do I mean by that? You have to have 1 in order to have 2. Because 1 plus 1 equals 2. You have to have 1 plus 1 plus 1 to equal 3. But everything always begins with 1. There has to be a first. You can't have mathematics without having 1. Everyone follow that one? Does that make sense? So mathematics in itself proves the existence of God. Is that cause? How did I get to 2 without 1? How did I get to 3 without 1, 1, 1? How did I get to 4 without 1, 1, 1, 1? There's always a positive integer that's used to get mathematics, or to get addition. So how did the world come to be? You guys know this movie, The Matrix? Remember in the movie The Matrix, for those that watched it? The Matrix was like an illusion. It was all in people's minds. Is this world just an illusion? Like some philosophers will say that we're not actually real. Like we're not actually existing. This is an illusion. You just think that you see each other. You think that you have experiences. You think that you have relationships, but it's just an illusion. If the world is an illusion, if the universe is an illusion, then who or what is having the illusion? And what's the point of us even discussing this at this point? Follow me? Maybe it was self-created. Maybe the world just spontaneous combustion. You guys remember that term? Who knows what spontaneous combustion is? How long ago did they disprove spontaneous combustion? Sorry, spontaneous generation, but spontaneous combustion is the term. Spontaneous generation. How long ago did they prove spontaneous generation? Or disprove, rather? Huh? Way back in the day. We don't even know the exact time frame, but they did scientific experiments to find out that spontaneous generation is not something that actually could possibly happen. So, was the world self-created? Did we just come to exist because of self-creation? Maybe the world is just eternal. That it's just always been. What do you guys think of that one? Huh? Why does it not make sense? Why can't the world just have always been here? You guys know thermodynamics? Anyone know thermodynamics? According to thermodynamics, basically everything always has to come to a state of equilibrium. And once, like, if the world always existed, the world would eventually have to become cold, dark, dead, and virtually motionless. What do I mean by that? Can anyone explain that? Is that if the world always existed, there has to be something that eventually comes to an end. Like, you know stars, you ever seen the way stars like exist? Like a star basically becomes bright when it's about to die, right? That is a cyclical way of experiencing that everything that starts or everything that exists must come to an end. Or if something was, because nothing that we have is eternal. Like, if you can think of one thing right now for me that's eternal, then I'll give you $100. That woke you guys up. If you can think of one thing that is eternal, that doesn't come eventually to an end, I'll give you $100. Obviously, with the exception of God, we'll do some other things. But we're not here. God doesn't exist at this point. Or maybe we can just go with the most logical. Is that the world was created. Genesis chapter 1. That it starts with what? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I think the fourth is the most reasonable. An illusion doesn't make sense to me. What was the second? Self-created doesn't make sense to me. What was the third?
Always existed.
Eternal? Oh yeah, that's what it was. Eternal. The fourth makes the most sense to me. Let me ask you a question. You go to an island, right? An island that people said was uninhabited. You are Christopher Columbus, and you land on this island. You are the first person to get to this place. You discovered land that has never been inhabited. You are Mr. Christopher Columbus himself. And you're excited, you're ready to put the Egyptian flag down and say that, you conquered this land, and in the name of, General El-Sisi, you have this place. So excited. And then you get to the island, and you see SOS written on the sand. What would you say? Man, I must have been wrong. There's probably somebody living here, right? That would make sense, right? You wouldn't just say SOS just happened to be there, right? It just miraculously, through erosion, SOS formed perfectly with the periods in between. Just happened. What about this? What about you continue to explore this island and you see this beautiful handcrafted hut in the middle of the island. Would you just say that this island just existed? Or this building just came out of nothing? Nobody put it there? Would you just say that the wind maybe put the roof on it? Maybe the little designs on the building. It just happened to happen. Would you say that? Or what about me? I just happen to have, hair on my hands. I just happen to have, eyeballs. I just happen to have hair. I just happen to be able to walk, to be able to talk. I just happened. It's just by accident. The second argument, which is the argument of design, makes perfect sense. So the first argument is what? Argument of what? First argument is the argument of cause and effect. Come on, guys. Come on. Am I boring? Give me something. Cause and effect. Cause and effect. First law is the law of cause and effect. The second law is the argument of design. Okay? Did you guys see this article that has been circulating and trending all over Facebook recently? Well, the Wall Street Journal put out an article, I think this was early in December. And it says, science increasingly makes the case for God. The odds of life existing on another planet grow even longer. Intelligent design, anyone? Basically, the article goes on to say that the odds of another universe, like the odds of this universe that we live in right now, existing anywhere else was like 10 to like this, what's like after trillion times to the 10, there's like this mathematical number that is not even, they don't even have a term for it. The odds of another life existing on another planet. And the way that the world is so intricately designed. So these scientists were writing this article and were saying that the possibility of Earth just existing and the universe being so large, and there's not one other planet or place where life exists, the odds are like astronomical. So science is now starting to prove the existence of God more and more. And they're starting to prove to more and more say that there has to be a designer. There has to be somebody that came up with this. Let me ask you this. What are the chances of a tornado blowing through a junkyard, right? And basically, a 747, perfect, becoming. So the junkyard is empty, and all of a sudden a tornado comes through the junkyard, happens to scrap a lot of metal together and forming a perfect 747 plane. What are the odds of that happening? You would say to somebody who made that argument, you're a fool. Like, that obviously, logically cannot happen in any shape, way, or form. You are a dummy. Don't even have this conversation with me. You guys are crazy. No. Like, actually, the wind and through, force and through, various different things. Actually, I think that could happen. And you and I start to have this debate. You say, Chris, you are a fool. I'm not going to listen to you for a second. So why is it when we talk about the universe that we say the universe being so intricately designed that when we say that there is a designer, that person is a fool? You follow me? So far, so good? Somebody even mentioned this to me the other day. They said, the argument, there's even a better argument, Chris. They said, just the idea that man is able to think of a being greater than him proves the existence of God. I said, what does that even mean? How did we come up with this idea of this infinite, all-being, creating, all-knowing, all-powerful? How did we come up with this idea unless there's something within us that has always been searching for our Creator? Something innate. I guess that kind of makes sense. But the next argument, I think, is one that really makes sense for me. So far, what are the arguments? Cause and effect, design. Argument of what now? Moral law. This one to me is a good one. So, you guys believe in morality, right? What is morality? To know what's right and what's wrong. Who defines what's right and wrong? How did we come up with the standards by which we define something to be right versus wrong? Conscience. Okay. Who's to say that the right thing to do isn't for me to go and to slaughter every single one of you in this room? Sounds a little vulgar, right? The wow factor. Who's to say that that's not the right thing to do? The right thing for me to do is to come into this church and to kill every single one of you. That's the right thing. You'll say, no, you're evil, you're wicked, you're a criminal. We should go lock you up in Guantanamo Bay, you terrorist. And I'd say, why? Why? I'm doing what I think is right. If there's no standard of ultimate morality, who defines what morality is? What's the standard by which we define what's morality? Let's put it even in your terms, okay? You study super hard for an exam, right? You work your butt off. You really sit home and you study super hard and you really, really put 150% of your time in. And you get your test back and you get a 32. You get a 32 and you're like, man, I got the best score in the world. 32, perfect score. I got a 32, that is a perfect. And everybody looks at you and says, are you crazy? Like 32 out of 100. Like 100 is a perfect score, not a 32. And you say, no, in my opinion, 32 is a perfect score. And you go to your teacher and you say to her, teacher, you have no idea what is right. 32 is a perfect score. I deserve an A in this class. What do people think of you? They say you're a lunatic, right? They would say you're a lunatic. So how do we define what is ultimate perfection unless we have a standard by which what perfection is? Make sense? C.S. Lewis. You guys know C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia? Amazing, amazing writer. He wrote a book called Mere Christianity. And in the book Mere Christianity, he says this famous quote. He says, as an atheist, and it's on your handout, by the way, guys. He says, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing the universe when I called it unjust? You can't call something straight unless you know what you can't call something crooked unless you know what straight is. You can't call something evil unless you know what good is. You can't say something, a 32 is 100, unless you have 100 as the basis by which you have a standard. Does that make sense? Did I nail that in as concrete as it possibly can be? Does anyone have any questions about that? Morality gives us a standard by which we know the existence of God. Some people will say, that's just innate. Every human knows that you just shouldn't kill, or you shouldn't steal, or you shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't do that. Who put that idea in that person's mind? Who put morality in humanity? What differentiates us from animals? Morality, right? So far, so good? We're almost done, guys. I know. Just pay attention just a little bit more. Immanuel Kant, a famous atheist. And when you get to college, some of you guys that are in college, you probably studied the writings of Kant. And he says, the existence of God can be deduced from the existence of good. He even admits it. He says, you know what? I guess the existence of God can be deduced from the existence of good. We talked about this before. The argument from the origin of the idea of God. Is that on your hand? Yeah. The fourth argument is the argument from the origin of the idea of God. Sorry, my notes got a little jumpy. So, like I said before, we have ideas of a lot of things, right? The ideas that we have either arise from within us or outside of us. One of the ideas that we talked about before that comes from within us is this idea of God. Where did we get this? I'm not going to go into this one too much further because I feel like we hit the nail on the head before. But the question is this. Is why, since humanity has begun, has man always desired to find out who his creator is? since the beginning of existence. If you go into ancient Egyptians, ancient Greeks, ancient Phoenicians, Mayans, Incans, all of them have the idea of God. All of them have this idea of something beyond them, something supernatural. Where did they get this from? Why didn't they just say they were God? Why can't I be God? Why can't you be God? Where did they get that from? I think this is the weakest of them, of the arguments, in my opinion, but it's something to think about. But for me personally, I know that God exists because of my relationship. I can have logic, and I can have philosophy, and I can have lots of different things to defend my faith, but I know God exists because of my relationship with Him. And ultimately, guys, we can sit here, we can talk, for the remainder of the day, we're going to talk about history, we're going to talk about philosophy, we're going to talk about so many different things. But ultimately, I can give you all these logical things, and you can say to me, so what, who cares? I don't care. All right, God, ooh, the man upstairs, ooh, he's going to strike me with lightning if I don't believe in Him. No, God won't do that. He won't do that. He'll give you the choice to choose Him. He'll give you the choice to love Him. He'll give you the choice to accept Him. But ultimately, your experience with God is the primary reason for why you believe in what He exists. Or why I don't believe that He exists, I know that He exists. I know that God exists. I know that God exists because of the various miracles that He's done in my life. I know that God exists because, I'll give you a perfect example. We're in the middle of Tanzania in Africa. And Tanzania is infamously known for kidnapping white people. They see white people, they're going to kidnap you because you are straight cash, homie. They just know that if they kidnap you, they are going to be able to call your parents, call your family, and get lots of money from you. So you see a bunch of white people, you pack up your vans, you go, you kidnap every single one of them, you throw them in your truck, and you have ransom. We're in Africa, we're in Tanzania, and the great bishop of Africa says to us, let's go do a Bible study on the beach in Lake Victoria. And we say, okay, beautiful, Lake Victoria is a great place. But then all of a sudden, the bishop tells us, you need to leave because when the sun starts to go down, this is when us being kidnapped is the biggest threat. It's all right, sun starts going down, we pack out the church bus, we're super excited to go home, we had a great Bible study, great time. And all of a sudden, the great cab driver, the great bus driver, parks the bus on the sand. And anyone knows just physics or knows just logic, you should never park a big, heavy bus on sand. Why? Because if you park a big, heavy bus on sand, you're not getting out. So me thinking, like at the time I was working out, so I thought I was super strong. I get in the front, I start pushing, and I tell people in the back, sit on the back and jump on the wheels, and we'll push, and we'll make sure that we get this moving. And at this point, it's dark. In Tanzania, there are wild dogs. So you start hearing dogs bark. You start hearing the evening call for prayers from the local mosque. So we start freaking out. We had girls with us. The group was probably 10 guys and 20 girls. So prime time hostage. Prime time. And all of a sudden, we're like, the girls, we see them sitting around in a circle and crying, and they're like, we're going to die, it gets all dramatic. And, people start saying their last wishes, and they say, if you're able to go tell my parents, that I love them, and tell my girlfriend. I said, you had a girlfriend? Like, yeah, tell my girlfriend that I love her, and I was planning on marrying her in 15 years, but, and all of a sudden, we're like freaking out, and me personally, I'm trying to be the tough guy, I'm bringing a group from New York, so, New Yorkers, we're known to be tough. We don't get scared, are you kidding me? And all of a sudden, we get together and we just say, you know what, at this point, we can't move the bus, we can't do anything. The only thing that we can do is we can just pray. So I kid you not, guys. And that trip for me to Africa proved the existence of God. I was a skeptic before, but in 2007, my first trip to Africa, When I left, I said, there's not a chance in the world that the existence of God is not real. So we sit there, we start praying, and I'm like, all right, we're going to pray. Guys, some of us should be pushing the van. Like, we should be trying, we should be lifting. We should get everybody in circles. But the bishop in his wisdom said, everybody just be quiet. Let's sit here in a circle, let's pray. We started praying. 5 minutes later, I'm not joking, this white guy, there's no white people in Tanzania. Tanzania is an African country. This white guy wearing shorts and a white t-shirt pulls out his huge Mercedes truck, has a hook, hooks us in, and pulls us out of the sand. I'm like, who is this guy? Where did he come from? I don't know where he came from. Obviously, it wasn't Jesus. I'm not going to assume that he was Jesus. But what I'm going to say is that immediately, it could have been Jesus. I don't know. But I'm not going to take this and jump to the next level. What I'm going to say is that God sent us somebody. Within 5 minutes of us praying, we're pushing, we're stressing, we're lifting, we're doing all these different things, and we can't get out. So the existence of God with me is based on experience. And that trip for me, where there was 20 different stories that I could tell you. Where somebody was with me that trip, this kid, and he wasn't really into God. He said, I'm not into God, I don't believe in him, but I'll just come with you. Well, I want an adventure from something. Let's see monkeys and chimpanzees and all those things. And he went to go visit a group in the village, and he said, what can we pray for you for? Chris will pray, he believes in God. And they said, pray for rain. This city hadn't had rain, and there was a drought in about 3 months. So we went on the trip, and we got back. We went back to the compound after we finished, preaching, and they said to us, we said, we talked to the group, and they said, one of the areas that we went to visit, they said, can you pray for us for rain? So we got together as a group. We started praying for rain. All of a sudden, I'm kidding, I kid you not, it was like the monsoons, and like it was as if the clouds had opened up and it was pouring out rain. I've never seen rain like that. Joe, you were on that trip in 2009, I think. It was 2009. All of a sudden, it popped out, rain and thunder and all this different stuff. I'm like, how did it start raining? It was a drought, for the last 4 months. And now all of a sudden you're going to tell me that it's going to start raining? That's why I believe in God. And I can tell you hundreds of stories. But my relationship with God, the relational verification of God is the biggest thing for me. Is there a scientific method to measure anger, love, all that stuff? The same thing is applied for God. The biggest question for us guys is this. Is why would so many people give their life for God if He wasn't real? Why would so many people be willing to give up, sell all that they have, live in monasteries for God if they didn't believe He was real? Or they didn't have a relationship, an experience with Him? You can't believe in God because of what I tell you. You can't believe in God because of the logic that I give you. But you can believe in God mostly because of your experience with Him. And I challenge you, by the end of today, when we get to the next talk, I challenge you to be able to walk out of here and to have a reason to not believe in God. I'm going to read you guys a final story. We're wrapping up, sorry. I know lunchtime is about to be back. So, I'm going to read you guys a story. It's called The Conversation with a Professor. Okay? Anyone ever read this story? The Conversation with a Professor? So, guys, this is the end. Just focus on it. Alright? So, an atheist professor of philosophy was speaking in his class on the problem science has with God. The Almighty, he asked one of his students to stand and said, "Professor, do you believe in God?" The student said, "Absolutely, sir." So the professor said, "Is God good?" The student said, "Sure." "Is God all-powerful?" The student said, "Yes." The professor says, "My brother died of cancer, even though he prayed to God to heal him. Most of us would attempt to help others who are ill, but God didn't. How is this God good then?" The student was silent. The professor then said, "You can't answer, can you? Let's start again, young fella. Is God good?" The student said, "Yes." "Is Satan good?" The student said, "No." "Where does Satan come from?" The student says, "From God." "That's right. Tell me, son, is there evil in this world? The student says yes. Evil is everywhere, isn't it? And God did make everything. Correct. So who created evil? The student didn't answer. Professor says, is there sickness, immorality, hatred, ugliness? All these terrible things exist in the world, don't they? The student said, yes, sir. Professor says, so who created them? The student had no answer. Professor says, science says you have 5 senses you use to identify and observe the world around you. Tell me, son, have you ever seen God? The student says, no, sir. Tell us, have you ever heard your God? The student says, no. Have you ever felt your God, tasted your God, smelt your God? Have you ever had any sensory perception of God for that matter? No, sir, I'm afraid I haven't. Yet you still believe in Him. Yes. According to empirical, testable, demonstratable protocol, science says your God doesn't exist. What do you have to say to that, son? Nothing. He says, I only have faith. Yes, faith. And that's the problem that science has. The student asked the professor some questions. He said, all right, it's my turn. Professor, is there such thing as heat? The professor said, yes. Is there such thing as cold? Yes. No, sir, there isn't. All of a sudden, the room got quiet. Sir, you can have lots of heat, even more heat, superheat, mega heat, white heat, a little heat or no heat. But we don't have anything. We don't have anything called cold. We hit 458 degrees below zero, which is no heat. But we can't go further after that. There is no such thing as cold. Cold is only a word used to describe the absence of heat. We cannot measure cold. Heat is energy. Cold is not the opposite of heat, sir. Just the absence of it. All of a sudden, there's a pin drop in the classroom. Student says to the professor, what about darkness? Is there such thing as darkness? Yes, the professor says. What is night if there isn't darkness? He says, sir, you're wrong again. Darkness is the absence of something. You can have low light, normal light, bright light, flashing light, but if you have no light constantly, you have nothing, and it's called darkness, isn't it? In reality, darkness isn't. It is. If it is, you would be able to make darkness darker, wouldn't you? So the student, all of a sudden, puts the professor in check. So he continues on. He says, so what is your point you're trying to make, sir? So the student responds, sir, my point is your philosophical premise is flawed. The professor says, how? Sir, you're working on the premise of duality. You argue there is life and there is death, a good God and a bad God. You're viewing the concept of God as something finite, something we can measure. Sir, science can't even explain a thought. It uses electricity and magnetism, but has the opposite of life. The opposite of life is to be ignorant of the fact of death, and it cannot consist as a substantive thing. Death is not the opposite of life, just the absence of it. Now tell me, professor, do you teach your students that they evolved from a monkey? The professor says, if you're referring to the natural evolutionary process, absolutely. Have you ever observed evolution with your own eyes? The professor looks with a smile on his face and starts to realize, all right, I'm going to get rocked right now. Since no one has ever observed the process of evolution at work and cannot even prove this is the process of an ongoing endeavor. Are you not teaching your opinion, sir? Are you not a scientist but a preacher? Student, is there anyone in this class who has ever seen the professor's brain? Student continues on and says, if anyone here has ever heard the professor's brain, felt it, touched it, or smelt it, no one here has appeared to have done so. So according to the established rules of empirical, stable, demonstratable protocol, science says you have no brain, sir. With all due respect, sir, how do we know that we should trust your lectures then? The room was silent. The professor says, I guess you'll have to take it on faith then, son. That's exactly it, sir. The link between man and God is faith. That is all that keeps things alive and moving. That student was said to be Albert Einstein. So the question for you is this. We can prove it all, we can talk about it all, but if you don't believe it all, you don't have faith, it's pointless. Alright, so I'm going to leave you guys with that. Let that sink for a little bit. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about, is Christianity a way or the way? At this point, we've only talked about God existing. But there are many gods. Muhammad, Buddha, Vishnu, whatever person. So I want you guys to think, process that, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about proving that Christianity is the way. Alright? Glory be to God forever. Amen.